Welcome, dear listener, to a story that begins where most of us feel safest, in the quiet heart of a small suburban neighborhood. Here, the lawns are neat, the houses stand shoulder to shoulder in neat rows, and the air carries the hum of sprinklers and the faint laughter of children playing as the day fades into dusk. It is a world that seems predictable, safe, ordinary. And yet, it is in such places that danger can hide most easily. Beneath the painted shutters and polite smiles, lives are stitched together with threads of jealousy, deceit, and secrets too fragile to survive the light of truth. But before we step inside this neighborhood, before we cross the threshold into living rooms that hold more silence than warmth, or kitchens that echo with words left unsaid, let me say this. If you find this summary helpful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Novel Whisper Official, and comment below the title of the novel you'd like us to summarize next. We'll make it happen soon. Now let us walk down this quiet street, where every window seems to glow with domestic peace, but where shadows shift just out of sight. It is late evening. The sun has slipped beneath the horizon, leaving behind the fading orange that softens into violet. A woman stands at her window, clutching a glass of wine that trembles slightly in her hand. Her name is not yet important, because in this story, identities will blur, alliances will fracture, and the lines between truth and lies will vanish. For now, it is enough to know she watches her neighbor pulling into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the trimmed hedges, watches the couple next door moving about their kitchen, laughing too loudly, as if to drown out the silence that lingers after the guests are gone. Watches because in this place, watching has become a habit. The neighborhood is bound not by trust, but by surveillance. Every curtain twitches with curiosity. Every conversation drips with subtle questions disguised as casual concern. The stillness carries a hum of tension, like an orchestra holding its breath before the first note. Inside one house, a family of 3 sits down to dinner. The clink of cutlery is too sharp, the smiles rehearsed. The father's eyes linger on his phone longer than on his wife. The mother glances toward her teenage daughter, who rolls her eyes and pushes peas across her plate. Ordinary, yes. But ordinary is a mask. And in this neighborhood, masks never stay in place for long. Elsewhere, a man returns home late. His shirt is rumpled, the faint scent of perfume clinging to his jacket. Perfume that does not belong to his wife. He pauses before entering, his breath shallow, rehearsing the lies he has told so often they almost feel true. In the silence of his car, his heart pounds, because he knows that even the best-kept secrets have a way of bleeding through. And then there is the new arrival, a woman who does not yet belong, whose presence is both curious and unsettling. Her smile is bright, her voice warm, but her eyes seem to take in everything. She notices the way the neighbors glance at each other too quickly. She senses the undercurrent, the unease. And without meaning to, she has already become the center of their whispers. This is how it begins. With the illusion of safety, with the hush of a neighborhood that believes nothing can touch it. With people who think their secrets are theirs alone. But what they don't yet know is that every small act Every hushed word, every choice made in the dark will weave together into a storm that will crash through their windows, tear down their illusions, and leave them gasping in the aftermath, because the truth has already begun to stir. And though no one knows it yet, someone will pay the price. Someone will lose everything. And she didn't see it coming. The neighborhood wakes beneath the pale light of morning, the sun stretching long shadows across dew-soaked lawns. It is the kind of morning that promises peace. Birdsong threading through the air, the smell of coffee drifting from open windows. But peace, here, is a thin veil stretched over something darker. The cracks appear in the smallest ways. A whispered argument behind a closed door, the sharp sound of a mug breaking against tile, a quick glance exchanged between husband and wife that speaks of distance too wide to cross. On the surface, everything still appears normal. The cars pull out of driveways, the children shuffle towards school with backpacks too heavy for their small frames. Neighbors nod politely as they pass one another on the sidewalk. But each smile is brittle, each gesture rehearsed. Inside one of those houses, a woman named Stephanie folds laundry with mechanical precision. Each shirt, each pair of jeans, folded and stacked neatly, as though control over fabric might restore control over her life. She listens to the steady rhythm of the washing machine, but her thoughts are not steady. They spin, circling the moment last night when her husband came home later than usual. He had offered an explanation, casual and well-practiced, but she saw the hesitation in his eyes. She knows him too well. Knows when his voice wavers, when his excuses are polished just enough to shine, but not enough to convince. Across the street, another household brews its own unease. Eleanor, elegant and sharp, stands at the sink washing dishes, her gaze fixed on the house next door. Her husband, Richard, had laughed too long at the new neighbor's joke, leaned in a little too close at the block party. Eleanor had caught the flicker in his eyes, the same flicker she'd seen before when temptation knocked at their door. The plates clatter too hard as she sets them down, and the smile she wore in public fades into something harder, colder. The new arrival, Rachel, becomes the silent axis around which the neighborhood begins to spin. She walks her dog at unusual hours, smiles at people with a knowing warmth, and though she seems open, she never truly reveals much about herself. Her presence unsettles the fragile equilibrium. People wonder where she came from, what she left behind, what secrets she carries in her suitcase, along with her carefully pressed dresses. It only takes one small moment for the facade to slip. At a casual afternoon gathering, neighbors clustered in a sunlit living room with glasses of wine and polite laughter, someone makes an offhand remark. A name, a memory, perhaps too sharp to be accidental. The room stills for a fraction of a second. Rachel laughs it off, but the laughter is a shade too loud, the deflection too smooth. Stephanie notices. Eleanor notices. The others notice too, but they tuck their suspicions away, like knives kept sharp in hidden drawers. Later that night, Stephanie finds herself staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, the sound of her husband's shower echoing behind the door. She studies her own face, the small lines of exhaustion, the eyes clouded with doubt, and wonders how long she has been pretending everything is fine. It is only when she hears his phone buzz on the counter, a name flashing across the screen she doesn't recognize, that her breath catches. She reaches for it, hesitates, then pulls her hand back. Not tonight, not yet. Meanwhile, outside, Rachel stands on her porch in the cooling night air, her eyes sweeping over the houses, their windows glowing like watchful eyes in the dark. She knows she's being talked about. She knows her presence has unsettled them. But what they do not know is that she carries with her more than mystery. She carries a past that, if revealed, will shatter the illusion of safety these neighbors cling to so desperately. And so the stage is set. The facade has cracked, faint but undeniable. Behind every smile, suspicion now grows like ivy, twisting, spreading, impossible to contain. The first fault line has opened beneath their feet, and soon, nothing will hold. By the second week, the newcomer had a rhythm that felt almost choreographed. The early dog walk in a grey hoodie, the late morning grocery run with a reusable bag and a polite nod at the cashier, the afternoon stretch on her porch with the paperback open and her gaze drifting above the page, as if listening for something only she could hear. She waved when waved at. She learned names quickly. She remembered them too. A small detail that both charmed and unsettled, because memory like that is a choice. Stephanie was the first to invite her in. Coffee at the kitchen island, a candle flickering in the citrus scent she always chose when she needed to reset the room. "I'm still settling," the newcomer said, smiling. "I'm Rachel, by the way." Of course she was. Rachel admired the framed photos on the refrigerator. A girl in a school play, a family at the beach, a couple leaning into each other in the kind of photo taken to prove a marriage is still a marriage. "Your daughter's beautiful," Rachel said. "Maya, right? She seems observant." It wasn't exactly a compliment. Stephanie felt the compliment anyway. A beat later, Rachel asked which streets were best at cutting around traffic to the main road. She mentioned a back route only locals used, the one with the hidden speed camera. Stephanie blinked. "How do you know about that?" Rachel smiled without answering and tapped the lid of her coffee cup twice, an absent habit that read like punctuation. Across the street, Eleanor watched the visit from behind the sliver of curtain she allowed herself when she pretended not to look. The dog, a lean, quiet thing with intelligent eyes, lay at Rachel's feet like a shadow. Eleanor told herself it was good manners to gather information. The neighborhood had standards. People had slid in before, smiling their way past boundaries. She knew what that cost. She wore a robe that had belonged to her mother, satin floral, the tie frayed silky from years of knots, and wondered when she had started dressing like the past to feel safer in the present. That night, the book club met in Eleanor's living room. Wine poured. Cheese arranged like it had meaning. The novel under discussion was about trust. The conversation, naturally, was not. Rachel had been invited with a neighborly flourish that really meant, "We want to see you up close." She sat on the end of the sofa and listened the way thoughtful people listen. Head tilted, eyes steady, smile intact. "I never leave my sliding door unlocked," someone said, laughing because everyone did. Eleanor's laugh caught in her throat. 10 years ago, she had once, and she had woken to the sense of someone already in the room. Nothing was taken, not officially. But afterward, she counted her jewelry like a prayer and slept lightly forever. "It's foolish," she said now, sharper than she meant. The room went still for a second. Rachel's gaze landed, gentle and unblinking. "Fear makes rituals out of us," she said softly. "Sometimes that's the only way to live." She said it like she knew. Later, as they were leaving, Richard came home and met Rachel in the doorway. He offered that practiced, charming smile he gave to new clients and waitstaff and the women at the front desk of the gym. Rachel's dog sniffed his shoe and wagged once. "We haven't met," he said, extending a hand. "Richard." "I've heard," Rachel replied, a breeze of a joke that was not really a joke. Eleanor watched the handshake. Short, standard, yet felt something old stir. That tiny, poisonous question, "Will I see it early enough this time?" She told herself not to be dramatic. She failed. Later, she'd tell herself it was the way Rachel's eyes didn't linger that troubled her most. Like she had seen everything she needed to in a blink. Maya, finishing homework at the dining table, noticed things because noticing was the way she survived adults who were always almost telling the truth. She noticed the small crescent at the back of Rachel's left ear, a pale mark shaped like a fingernail moon. She noticed, too, that Rachel never walked in a straight line down the block. She drifted from shadow to shade like she had learned to be comfortable where light thinned. The next day, scrolling idly through a forum she wasn't supposed to read, Maya paused at a thread about identity and starting over. A user icon, a crescent moon, the post itself. Sometimes you move not to forget, but to be forgotten. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself a lot of things. By the weekend, the whispers had learned to organize themselves. A cluster on the sidewalk, after yoga. A flurry of messages in the neighborhood thread that had begun as a space to borrow sugar and evolved into a place to exchange warnings. Does anyone know where she moved from? Someone said California. Someone said Colorado. Someone said a smaller town where a story had gutted a block, much like theirs. "We shouldn't gossip," a neighbor typed. She kept typing anyway. Curiosity wears its own moral code. On Saturday morning, Stephanie ran into Rachel at the farmer's market. It should have been harmless. Both of them touching peaches to judge their softness, smiling at the man who sold flowers wrapped in brown paper. "You seemed distant at book club," Rachel said without preamble. The words were light, the tone was not. Stephanie's smile held. "Just tired." "From what?" Rachel asked, as if the question had a right answer. Stephanie felt suddenly transparent, as if every moment she had stood in the dark, listening for the click of the garage door, was written on her skin. "From everything," she said, hating how honest it sounded. "I'm sorry," Rachel said, and she looked like she might mean it. That afternoon, the dog got loose. It happened fast. The collar slipped, a door not pulled fully closed, a streak of grey muscle and joy across 2 lawns. Rachel followed at a measured pace, not panicked, calling once. The dog cut through Eleanor's hydrangeas like a rumor and disappeared behind the garage. When Eleanor found him, he was sitting, alert, as if he had led her here on purpose. The collar lay in the grass, the inside of the leather was stamped with a name. Scout. Shar. Beneath it, another name, half sanded away, the kind of erasure that isn't erasure at all. Eleanor ran her thumb over the ghost of the old word. Lark? Lara? She couldn't tell. She returned the dog, held out the collar, and watched Rachel's face go still for the length of a breath. "Thank you," Rachel said. "He's always been a runner. Always." Eleanor filed the word where she filed everything she might need later. That evening, at dusk, Maya biked to the corner and back, and on her third pass, she saw Rachel talking to a man in a parked car. The car idled, one hand on the steering wheel, tapping the beat of a song Maya couldn't hear. Rachel leaned in, the dog at her heel. The man didn't look like anyone from the block. He had the nervous energy of someone borrowing time. Maya slowed, then sped up, like she hadn't been looking. She told herself she wouldn't mention it. She didn't know why keeping a stranger's secret felt like loyalty. On Sunday, a message slid into Stephanie's inbox from an unfamiliar address. No subject line, no greeting, a single link. She stared at it long enough for her computer to sleep. When she finally clicked, it led nowhere. A dead page. But the URL hung in her brain like a tune she couldn't place. She closed the laptop and pressed her hands to her eyes until stars bloomed behind her lids. In the quiet, she could hear her husband humming in the next room. The sound ordinary and intimate. A lullaby for a life she was not sure she got to keep. That night, when the blog settled and televisions flickered in sync, someone slipped a narrow envelope under Rachel's door. No postage, no return address. The paper was the kind hotels use for thank yous, that mean, "We hope you come back, but we won't notice if you don't." Rachel opened it in the hallway and stood very still. Inside was a single sheet, no signature, no preamble, black letters pressed too hard into the page. "I know who you are." She read it twice, then a third time, as if repetition could turn threat into misunderstanding. Finally, she folded it once, slid it into a drawer with a collection of small things that didn't belong together. A train ticket, 2 unpaired keys, a Polaroid whose edges had curled inward like it was trying to protect itself, and went to the sink to wash the words from her hands. Across the street, a woman in a satin robe watched the rectangle of Rachel's window, waiting for a sign of panic or remorse or anything at all. In the morning, the hydrangea petals would be bruised. In the morning, they would all pretend to have slept. The dinner was meant to be ordinary. A gathering of friends, couples around a polished oak table, wine glasses glinting in the glow of pendant lights, the kind of evening that stitched a neighborhood together with laughter and the illusion of intimacy. The hosts, proud of their curated menu, set out platters of roasted vegetables, glistening salmon, a tart that looked too perfect to touch. Candles flickered along the table, their flames steady against the air-conditioning hum. A fragile choreography of warmth, yet the air was not warm. It was charged, not with joy, but with the brittle static of people pretending. Stephanie and her husband sat side by side, their knees not touching, a gulf between them wider than the polished wood. She wore a smile she had practiced in the mirror, one that said, "I'm fine, we're fine, everything is fine." He told a story about work that sounded rehearsed, And when Rachel laughed politely from across the table, Stephanie felt her stomach twist, as though Rachel could hear the falsehood in every syllable. Eleanor was poised, her wineglass held as though it were a weapon polished into civility. She observed the tilt of her head, the too quick refill of a glass, the way Richard leaned slightly forward when Rachel spoke. That subtle lean, invisible to anyone who wasn't searching, pierced her like an old wound reopened. She sipped, pretending not to notice, and said little. Her silence was both shield and blade. Conversation bloomed like smoke, wide, curling, but never quite filling the room. Someone asked Rachel what brought her here, what made her choose this neighborhood. She smiled, set her glass down with delicate precision, and said, "Sometimes you just need a change." The answer floated, evasive yet final. No one pressed, but the silence that followed was heavy. Everyone wanted to press. The food became a prop. Forks moved, knives scraped, but appetites shrank beneath the weight of what lingered unsaid. Richard filled Rachel's glass before she had finished her sip, and Eleanor's jaw tightened. Maya, too young to be part of the dinner, but old enough to listen from the staircase, caught every shift, every silence. Her eyes widened as she heard her mother's laughter, too loud, too brittle, and wondered how long adults thought children couldn't tell the difference between truth and performance. Halfway through dessert, the first fracture appeared. A neighbor, perhaps emboldened by wine, teased Stephanie's husband about his late nights at the office. The words, meant to be playful, struck like a thrown stone. Stephanie's spoon stilled against porcelain. Her husband chuckled, deflecting, but his hand tightened around the stem of his glass. Rachel's gaze flicked toward him, calm and unblinking, as if she were measuring his lie against something she already knew. The room cooled. Eleanor asked a question about the new community watch schedule, but the words sounded too sharp, too deliberate, like a blade forced between bricks. The conversation limped on, polite but pleading. And then, just as plates were being cleared, it happened. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her eyes gliding over the group, with the serenity of someone who sees too much. "Funny," she said softly, almost to herself, "how people think they can hide things in neighborhoods like this. But walls are thin, and eyes are everywhere." The words landed like glass shattering. Laughter faltered. Wineglasses froze midair. Someone coughed. Someone else reached for the water jug, just to move, to do something. Stephanie's pulse thudded against her neck. Eleanor's lips parted, but no sound came. And Richard, though he forced a chuckle, shifted uneasily in his seat, as if his chair had turned suddenly fragile beneath him. The evening ended in a scatter of excuses. Plates were scraped, coats lifted, goodbyes exchanged too quickly. Doors closed behind departing guests, and the street outside returned to silence. Yet inside each house, the silence was anything but peaceful. Stephanie's husband poured another drink in the kitchen, alone. Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the faint reflection in the mirror, asking herself whether she was losing him again. And Rachel stood at her window, Scout at her side, her silhouette cut against the glow of her living room. She looked outward, calm, steady, almost triumphant, as if the storm she had conjured was only the beginning. The dinner was meant to be ordinary. Instead, it left behind a room full of cracks. And in cracks, shadows always grow. The neighborhood carried the dinner like an unhealed bruise. In the mornings, polite waves lingered a second too long, waited with suspicion. Voices were softer, conversations clipped, as if everyone feared that one more word might slice open the silence and spill what they had been desperate to keep hidden. Stephanie felt it most acutely. Her husband left earlier now, returned later, the explanations tumbling from his lips too smoothly, polished with practice. She had stopped asking questions because she already knew the answers. Instead, she observed the faint scent of perfume that clung to his shirt, the way his eyes flicked away when she mentioned Rachel's name, the careful tenderness he reserved for everyone but her. One evening, while folding laundry in the quiet of their bedroom, she found a receipt crumpled in his pocket. A restaurant she had never been to. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine. The timestamp, late, very late, glared at her like an accusation. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the paper flat, and in her chest, rage and despair battled for air. She tucked the receipt inside a book on her nightstand, as though hiding it might delay the storm that was already gathering. Across the street, Eleanor lived in a different kind of torment. Richard had grown restless again, that familiar edge in his voice, that hunger in his eyes. She knew the signs. She had lived through them before. The way he lingered at the curb when Rachel passed by, the too quick smile he offered, the small courtesies that meant nothing and everything at once. Eleanor wanted to scream, to demand, to shatter the fragile illusion they maintained. But instead she played her role, polished and perfect, and let her silence grow sharp enough to cut. And Rachel, oh Rachel. She moved among them with effortless grace, her presence a ripple that disturbed everything it touched. She was careful, though, always careful. A touch of her hand on her arm during conversation, a glance that lingered a heartbeat longer than necessary, a laugh that filled the spaces left by unspoken doubts. She never crossed the line outright, but she brushed against it so often that it blurred, until no one could tell where it truly lay. One night, Stephanie saw it with her own eyes. She had gone outside to take the trash to the curb when she noticed them, Rachel and her husband, standing just beyond the glow of a street lamp. Their voices were low, intimate, carried on the soft night air. She couldn't make out the words, but the way they leaned toward each other, the ease in their postures, the unspoken familiarity. It was enough. Stephanie's breath caught, the bag of trash slipping from her hand and spilling across the driveway. The sound startled them, and they stepped apart too quickly. Her husband's face flushed, Rachel's expression unreadable in the shadows. Stephanie stood frozen, shame burning in her chest, until Rachel offered her a smile that was neither apology nor denial, but something far more dangerous. Acknowledgement. From that moment, Stephanie knew. It wasn't speculation, it wasn't paranoia. It was truth, standing there in the dark with them, undeniable as the pounding of her heart. But she wasn't the only one watching. Eleanor, from her window, had seen the same thing. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to shed. It was happening again. The betrayal she had feared, the humiliation she had sworn she would never endure a second time, was unfolding in front of her like a cruel play. And Rachel, the stranger she had never trusted, was at the center of it all. By the next morning, the neighborhood hummed with quiet tension. Conversation stopped when Rachel approached. Doors closed a little too quickly. But Rachel, unshaken, carried on as though nothing had changed. She walked Scout through the streets, her gaze steady, her smile polite. And behind her, whispers trailed like shadows. For Stephanie, the betrayal hollowed her. For Eleanor, it enraged her. For Rachel, it seemed deliberate, controlled, as though every move had been chosen with precision. And beneath it all, the hidden affair became less about passion and more about power. The kind of power that could unravel lives, topple marriages, and turn neighbors into enemies. In a neighborhood where appearances were everything, Rachel had found the most devastating weapon of all: desire. And with it, she had begun to break them, one by one. Maya walked to a house that sounded like it was holding its breath. Down the hall, the shower hissed, cut off, and the pipes knocked once. A hollow, startled sound. Her mother moved through the kitchen with the careful quiet of someone who didn't want to wake a sleeping animal. The clock on the stove blinked 7:02 in a tired green. Her father hummed under his breath while he tied his shoes, a tune with no melody, something to fill the space where words should have been. At the table, Maya peeled the corner from a slice of toast and watched the way steam lifted from her mother's coffee, streaming toward the ceiling and disappearing. "You'll be late," her father said. But he didn't look at her. He looked past her, over her, like he was reading a sign across the street. The phone on the counter vibrated. He silenced it without checking. Her mother's hand hesitated in midair, then resumed stirring, as if stirring could keep the day from separating. She walked to school instead of taking the bus. The air was cool and thin, the sky a polished gray that promised rain without committing. When she reached the corner where the hydrangeas were still bruised from the dog's sprint the other day, Rachel was there with Scout, the leash looped twice around her wrist. "Morning," Rachel said, that gentle, glass-smooth voice. Scout pressed his nose against Maya's palm, like he remembered something about her that she didn't know yet. "He likes you," Rachel added. "He doesn't like everyone." She smiled, and her eyes kissed the edges of everything they saw. "You notice things, don't you?" It was a question, and not a question. Maya nodded, then wished she hadn't. She could feel the scar behind Rachel's ear, the way you can feel a splinter you haven't pulled yet. "Your dog had a different name," she heard herself say. She wasn't sure why she said it aloud. Rachel's gaze ticked sideways, then returned. "Dogs have lives before us," she said lightly. "So do people." The leash jerked once, as if Scout didn't like the answer either. "Have a good day, Maya." And then she was moving, the dog's steps measured and easy, the leash like a line she barely had to hold. At school, the facts of the day, fractions, an essay outline, the warning about the fundraiser deadline, slid past Maya like rain on a window. When she tried to write, her pencil made small, furious dents in the paper. Her best friend, Rena, nudged her at lunch. "You look like you saw a ghost." Maya said she hadn't. The truth was worse. Ghosts were quiet. Adults were loud, even when they were silent. On her phone, under the table, she opened a note and wrote 2 words. Crescent moon. She drew a thumbnail sketch of the mark she had seen. She wrote Scout, Lock, and circled it. A teacher cleared her throat, and Maya snapped the phone face down, as if she were hiding a contraband map. After school, she took the long way home, the one that cornered behind the row of garages and past the old maple with roots like knuckles. A car idled there where no car should have idled, a sedan the color of wet slate. The driver had the restless energy of someone trying to be invisible without having learned how. Through the cracked window, a voice drifted, not quite a whisper, and not quite not. "You can't keep doing this," he said. Another voice, Rachel's, came back, low, still. "You think you know what I can keep?" Scout's ears pricked, and the man's hand tapped the wheel in a rhythm that made Maya think of a clock inside a wall. She didn't stop. She slowed, because you had to slow to see. But she kept the steady forward motion of someone minding their own business, precisely because they weren't. After the car pulled away, she crouched near the curb where a scrap of white had snagged on a bit of weed. It was the corner of a photograph, sun-faded and soft-edged from being handled too much. A sliver of a woman's shoulder, a piece of sky, part of a necklace that looped like a question mark. She turned it over. The back was blank. Inside her house, the argument waited for her, like a storm she had left in the morning and found again in the afternoon, right where she'd put it. Her parents' voices came through the floor in the thinned way voices do when they have been held down for too long. "A receipt?" her father said, and she could hear the syllables turn sharp, shiny. "Do you hear yourself?" Her mother didn't answer, and Maya felt the silence, the way you feel a bruise before you touch it. She went to her room and closed the door and sat on the floor with her back against it. Because you could hold doors shut with weight, at least for a little while. When the rain finally came, it started as a hush, then thickened into a steady, private murmur that made the neighborhood look like it had been erased and drawn back in softer lines. In the blur of it, Scout slipped his collar again. Maya saw him streak past the front window like a thought you try to catch too late. She grabbed her raincoat and ran. He paused behind the garages. Of course he did. And when she came up to him, he leaned into her leg like someone grateful and unashamed about it. "Hey," she whispered, though no one was there to be shushed. She coaxed him with a palm out, slow. "Let's go home." Home could mean a lot of places, depending on who was saying it. Rachel appeared at the edge of the rain, umbrella open, hood down. Drops glossed her hair. "You're good with him," she said. "Thank you." She reached for the collar, and Maya handed it over, her fingers brushing Rachel's. Her skin was cold, then warm. "Come in for a minute," Rachel said. "You're soaked." Maya shouldn't have, and she knew it. But inside Rachel's kitchen, the light was a soft, honeyed color that made the air seem softer than outside. And there was a mug already waiting, steam making ghost-thin spirals above it. "Cocoa," Rachel said. "I don't use too much sugar." Scout curled like punctuation at Maya's feet. On the counter, under the shallow bowl that held spare keys and a few coins, something white peaked. A hotel note card, heavy stock, embossed with a name she didn't know. Astor. Astor what? Astor Inn? Astor Suites? The edges of the card were creased, as if someone had folded and unfolded it too many times. Maya didn't mean to look. Seeing happened to her. She didn't do it on purpose. On the wall by the back door was a magnetic strip holding a row of keys that didn't match. Some had tags with clean, fresh label maker tape. Others had tape that had been peeled and relabeled, the old names tearing through the new. One said, Unit 3, in faint grey gauze beneath an all-caps Scout. There was a Polaroid pinned to a corkboard, the white frame grubby at the corners from fingers. Two figures stood at the edge of water, their heads turned away, the sky behind them bruised purple with the coming storm. The smaller figure's hair was shorter than Rachel's is now. The larger figure's hand rested on the smaller's shoulder, the way a hand can stake a claim and comfort at the same time. It's hard, Rachel said from the stove, not looking, when you know something and you're not sure what to do with it. Maya's heart misstepped. I don't, she started. But Rachel turned then, her eyes kind and not kind. Adults forget, she said softly, offering the mug. How much children see. The smile that followed was a polished thing. And how heavy that can be. Maya took the cocoa. It was too hot. She let it burn her tongue a little, because heat can make you feel present when you want to slip out of yourself. I should go, she said. My mom will worry, Rachel finished, as if she had rehearsed the line with other girls in other kitchens. Of course. At the door, Rachel rested a hand on Scout's head. Sometimes, she said conversationally, the way you talk about weather you can't control. People do foolish things because they're lonely. And sometimes they do cruel things because they're scared. It helps to know the difference. Maya thought of the receipt in her mother's book. The way her father's voice had hardened. The way her mother had smiled too hard in rooms that were supposed to be safe. Does it? She asked. It helps me, Rachel said. Back home, the house had the damp, metallic smell of rain, an argument. Her mother at the sink, sleeves pushed up, washing a single plate like it were a ritual that required devotion. Her father's shoes by the door, puddled dark beneath them. Where were you? Her mother asked, too calmly. Helping with Scout, Maya said, and watched the way the name moved across her mother's face. A flicker of something like relief and something like pain, braided together tightly enough to look like nothing at all. In her room, Maya laid the torn photograph corner on her desk and weighted it with a pencil to keep it from curling. She opened her notes and wrote Astor in block letters. She drew the keys and wrote Unit 3 under 1. She sketched the Polaroid frame and drew a storm where the sky should be. She drew a crescent behind an ear and colored it in until the paper thinned. When she was done, she read the list back to herself like a spell. Facts weren't comfort, but they were a way through the dark. Outside, the rain slowed to a thin, silvery mist, and the streetlights blinked awake, one by one, small moons falling into place. From her bed, Maya could see the rectangle of Rachel's kitchen window. A shadow moved through it. a woman crossing, pausing, bending toward a drawer. For a breath, Maya thought she saw the white flash of hotel paper in the woman's hand. Then nothing. Her phone, face down on the nightstand, hummed against the wood. Not a call, just a breath of a vibration as a message slipped into the dark, patient and silent, waiting for the moment someone would turn it over and began gently let it change everything. A cool breeze moved through the neighborhood, brushing the curtains with the kind of softness that lulled people into believing they were safe. Street lamps glowed their tired amber light. The sound of distant traffic faded, and most houses surrendered to the hush of bedtime rituals. But in one house, Stephanie lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her husband's breathing deep and even beside her. She could not sleep. The receipt, hidden inside the book on her nightstand, might as well have been a live wire pressed against her chest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his shadow bending toward Rachel in the dark. Their faces too close, their voices too low. Maya was awake too, in her room down the hall, her notebook open on the desk, sketches and scribbles glowing faintly beneath the beam of a small lamp. She added another word to the page, Asta, writing it in capital letters, underlining it twice. She didn't know why she needed to collect the fragments. She only knew she could not let them float loose. Then at 12:47 a.m., the phone rang. Not the steady ring of a neighborly call, not the soft chime of a text, but the sharp, insistent blare of a landline that seemed to slice the night in half. It came from Eleanor's house. She sat up, pulse racing before she even touched the receiver. Her husband stirred, muttered something, then rolled over. Eleanor pressed the phone to her ear, whispering, "Hello." Silence at first, then breathing, slow, deliberate, heavy. Her throat tightened. "Who is this?" she demanded. A pause, and then a voice, low, distorted, almost unrecognizable. "You don't know what's in your house," it said. And then the line went dead. The silence afterward was worse than the call. Eleanor sat frozen, the words drilling into her bones. She turned, staring at Richard, who slept peacefully, oblivious. But her mind twisted. What if the voice wasn't about him? What if it was about her? What if the call wasn't a warning, but a reminder? Across the street, Rachel sat in her living room, Scout curled at her feet. A phone lay on the table before her. Not ringing now. Silent. Still. Her eyes reflected the flicker of the television. She wasn't really watching. When the credits rolled and the screen faded to black, her face lingered in the glow for a moment before she stood and walked to the window. She parted the curtain with 2 fingers and stared out into the sleeping neighborhood. Meanwhile, in Stephanie's house, her husband's cell phone buzzed on the dresser. She hesitated only a second before reaching for it. One new message. No name, just a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. "It's already begun." That was all it said. No explanation, no signature. The words made her blood run cold. By morning, the story of the midnight call had slipped into the neighborhood, like smoke. Eleanor didn't tell anyone outright, but she couldn't hide the tremor in her hands, the way her voice caught when she spoke at the corner cafe. Stephanie noticed. Richard brushed it off. Rachel smiled too politely when Eleanor mentioned it, as though she already knew the content of the call, but the damage had been done. The phone call was a seed of dread, planted deep, sprouting suspicion in every direction. Neighbors who had once waved without thinking now glanced over their shoulders. Locks were double-checked, curtains pulled tighter. Every ring of a phone after dark became a shiver of possibility, and though none of them could have said why, they all felt the same thing. The call was not random, it was a beginning. The night had cracked, and through that crack, something darker had slipped inside. The storm arrived without thunder, the kind that slips in on cat feet and presses a damp palm over the neighborhood's mouth. A power line somewhere clicked, faltered, and the street fell into a softer dark. Appliances sighing into silence, clocks blinking and then giving up. In the half-light, the houses looked like sketches of themselves. Stephanie woke to the hush and felt for her husband's shape beside her. He wasn't there. The space was warm but empty, the impression of him on the mattress already fading. She reached for the lamp, forgot the power was out, and lay still, listening. From downstairs, the faint scrape of a drawer. A door easing shut. Then nothing. She was suddenly aware of the message on her phone from the night before. The words branded into her brain. It's already begun. Begun what? She swallowed, swung her legs to the floor, and the carpet was cold. A small shock that made her feel less like she was dreaming. 2 houses over, Eleanor stood at the bedroom window. In the robe she had convinced herself was armor. The power outage made the glass into a mirror. She could see the ghost of her own face superimposed on the street. Beside the faint reflection of her cheek, a deeper shadow moved, someone slipping between the hedges, dark within dark. She pressed her palm to the glass, as if she could push the figure back where it came from. In the bed, Richard stirred, muttered, turned his face to the wall. You don't know what's in your house, the midnight voice had told her. She had slept an hour at most, a thin, brittle hour that cracked at every small sound. Maya's phone became an island of light in the quiet. Battery power, a small defiance. She had fallen asleep in a sprawl of notes, graphite smudged along the heel of her hand like a secret she couldn't wash off. The vibration against the wood again. A message from a number that had no name. Stay inside tonight. That was it. No punctuation. She stared until the glow dimmed and went black, and for a moment it felt like the whole world had blinked. On the porch across the street, Rachel stood in a cone of lantern light. Scout sat at attention, ears tilted toward the sound of distant tires on wet asphalt. The dog's tail thumped once when she spoke his name, quieting again when a car passed the end of the block and kept going. Rachel turned the lantern down, then off, and the dark settled closer. She slipped the lantern into a drawer, and when she opened it, the edge of a white card flashed. Thick stock. A star-pressed emblem in one corner. Asta. She closed the drawer gently, like laying a lid on a restless pot. It was the small sound that sent Scout moving. The skitter of something behind the garages, or the whisper of a shoe on wet gravel, or a tension in the air animals register before we do. The leash snapped tight in Rachel's hand, and then he was gone. The habit of running lived in his bones. He was a shadow, slipping through deeper shadow, an arrow loosed with no aim but away. Maya heard the collar jingle and knew without looking. She was at the front door and out into the damp air before a thought could form. Barefoot on the porch, she paused, listening. The quiet of a neighborhood holding its breath. The faint patter of the sky thinking about rain. Somewhere, a late sprinkler ticking, stubborn in the blackout. She stepped into the yard, the grass cool and wet between her toes, and followed the line of garages toward the old maple whose roots root their way up from the earth. Stephanie reached the bottom stair and found her husband in the kitchen with his phone held close to his chest, the glow lighting the ridge of his cheekbone, his eyes hollowed into black. "What are you doing?" she whispered. And the whisper sounded like an accusation because everything did now. He flinched, turned the phone face down on the counter. "Power's out," he said, which was not an answer. "Go back to bed." She was about to tell him about the text when through the cracked kitchen window, the night changed texture, as if the dark itself had taken a breath. Eleanor left the window. The feeling had a direction, and it pulled her like tide. She found slippers by reflex and moved down the stairs with the care of a person descending into a memory they'd promised never to return to. At the back door, the lock felt slick under her fingers. She opened onto the yard, and the dark smelled like wet leaves and coin metal, and something else she couldn't name. Behind the garages, the ground dipped, a shallow shelf where rain gathered, and the air stayed cooler. Scout's nails clicked, then went quiet, and Maya slowed without meaning to, because quiet was a kind of warning. The shape resolved out of the dark, the way heavy things do, reluctantly, and all at once. At first, she thought it was a pile of leaves matted with rain, then the outline of a shoulder, the angle of a shoe that made no sense. She stopped a breath away. "Scout," she said, voice not her own. The dog stood with his body a tight line, head low, a small whine high in his throat. Maya took one step closer, and the light from a passing car slid along a face that did not move. It wasn't gore. It was the wrongness of stillness. The man's eyes were half shut, like he'd meant to finish a blink and forgotten how. She knew him, not his name. She didn't know his name, but the slate sedan, the tapping hand, the borrowed time in his posture. The man from the corner. For a moment, everything narrowed. The dark rimmed in, and the sound in her ears became the ocean in a shell. She didn't scream. She had always thought she might, but her body refused. Instead, she stepped backward, one foot, then the other, and bumped into someone who wasn't there until they were. Rachel's hands on her shoulders, steadying. "Don't look," Rachel said, and the softness of her voice felt like a betrayal of the image on the ground. "Come away." Her breath smelled like mint, and the kind of tea people drink when they're trying to sleep. Maya couldn't find a verb. Rachel turned her, placed one palm over Maya's eyes, the way you do with a skittish horse. "Breathe," she said. "In, out." Behind them, Scout took 2 careful steps closer to the body, and then lay down, as if keeping watch. The dog knew reverence without having been taught. From the edges of the block, sounds began to knit themselves. A door opening with care, someone's voice saying a name that belonged to no one present. a bottle tipping in a recycling bin and clinking once, oddly clear. Eleanor slipped along the fence line, following the instinct that had dragged her out of bed. She saw first the glint of metal near the man's hand. A keycard half buried in damp leaves, pale and stubborn. When she picked it up, the embossed star was gritty with grit, Asta, pressed into the plastic deep enough to feel with your fingertip. The muscle between her ribs cinched. She didn't see the rest of the card, didn't see the room number, because the number had been rubbed until it blurred. "Oh," she said, and it wasn't a word. It was air leaving. Stephanie arrived from the other side, barefoot, her nightgown wetted to the knees. Her husband hovered behind her, his phone up like a shield. The glow lit the planes of his face and twisted them. "Don't," he said, as if she were about to do something to make the scene worse. "Don't what?" she asked, and it was almost a laugh. "Be here? See?" She didn't look at him again. She was looking at the man, because whatever he was, whoever, he had once been alive enough to talk to someone in a car at dusk and tap his fingers, like time was a song. Now there was a scuff on his jaw, like the trace of a hand that had not been gentle. On his wrist, a faint tan line where a watch should have been, and wasn't. Rachel stepped back, but not far. In the lanternless dark, her face was an arrangement of shadows. "We need to call," she said. It sounded practiced, like something she had told other people in other yards. Stephanie nodded, fingers fumbling for her phone. Her husband muttered that his had no service. He shook it like bad reception, had a physical form that could be dislodged. Eleanor found her own phone by feel and dialed. It rang, blessedly, miraculously, and the operator's voice was unshakable in a way that made Eleanor want to cry. She gave the street, the cross street, the description in sentences that broke in odd places. "He's not breathing," she said, and heard herself make the word small. The operator told her to stay on the line. So she did, listening to the distant instruction, like a rope thrown from a boat she could no longer see. Lights began to bloom at corners as neighbors lifted blinds and leaned in, drawn by whatever in us refuses to ignore the sound of danger. Someone whispered, "Is that?" and then thought better of naming the dead before anyone official did. Another voice, thin with panic, said, "My kids!" And the window snapped shut again. The street gathered itself around the scene like fabric pulled into a fist. Maya stood with Rachel's hand still warm at her shoulder. "Who is he?" she asked, voice small, as if the question were a thing that might bite. Rachel's pause was a fraction too long. "I don't know," she said. It was a good lie. It was either very good or not a lie at all. The two options sat side by side in Maya's head like twins. Stephanie's husband took a step toward the body, then back, like he had tried a door, and found it locked. In the weak light of the phone, his expression slipped. Regret showed itself in the mouth first, then rearranged into something less useful. Stephanie watched him without blinking. At the edge of the garage, Eleanor watched them both, her mouth a thin line. Richard had not yet appeared, and his absence throbbed like a bruise under a sleeve. Sirens began as a suggestion, a distant ribbon of sound threading toward them. They grew, looping the air with urgency, pulling color into the night even before the lights were visible. Red-blue, red-blue, the heartbeat of the inevitable. Neighbors stepped back without being told, the way people do when ritual takes over. The first cruiser's beams swung across the hydrangeas, which flashed briefly, the unnatural color of television static. The officers moved with the quiet choreography of people who do not let shock show its face at work. One knelt, 2 steps from the man, and spoke into a radio in a code that blurred into the dark like a spell. Another drew a perimeter with yellow tape that clung to damp surfaces, turning the messy spill of garages and lawn into a rectangle with edges. A third officer turned to the gathered faces and said the things people always say in moments like that. "Please stay back. We'll need to talk to each of you." Did anyone see anything unusual tonight? Maya opened her mouth and closed it. Stephanie did the same. Eleanor felt the weight of the card in her pocket, a small rectangle of plastic, now warm from her body. She should hand it over. She would. But not yet. She wanted one moment alone with the fact. Rachel stood very still, and for a breath, the lantern's shadowless glow that had begun the evening seemed to come from her. By the time the ambulance arrived, the rain decided to commit and came in thin needles that tested the tape and tapped on the officers' hats. They lifted the man gently, as if gentleness could undo anything. A blanket went over his face, simple and absolute. The stretcher wheels made a sound like the end of something. As they rolled him past, the edge of the blanket shifted, and Maya saw the line along his jaw again, the trace of a watchless wrist, the stain at the collar that smelled faintly, weirdly, like hotel soap. She thought of the note card in Rachel's drawer, Asta embossed like a promise. She thought of the crescent moon icon on the forum, of the white corner of a photo on her desk, weighted by a pencil, of the message, "Stay inside tonight." She felt a shape in the story, but could not draw its outline yet. The block breathed together, a single body inhaling red-blue air. Phones lit faces into masks. Someone cried without noise. Someone else took a step forward and was gently moved back by an officer with a soft voice and a hard hand. A camera on a pole at the end of the street blinked its unblinking red, recording a night that would replay in fragments tomorrow and the next day. And for as long as the neighborhood needed to convince itself, it could have predicted what it could not. Inside her robe pocket, Eleanor closed her fist around the keycard until the embossed star pressed a crescent into her skin. Stephanie stood very straight and did not touch her husband. Rachel looked at the place on the ground where the body had been, as if absence were just another kind of presence. Scout leaned against her leg, steady as a metronome. The sirens faded to a patient quiet. The tape rippled. The first questions began, and across the sleeping part of town, in a room whose lights no one on this block had ever seen. A phone vibrated once on a nightstand, shaped like all nightstands. A message blinked onto the screen. "It's done." No one here in the wet, humming dark saw that coming either. Morning did not cleanse the street. The police tape still fluttered across the garages like a wound roughly stitched. The grass still pressed flat where stretcher wheels had passed. Neighbors walked their dogs with slower steps, voices hushed, glances darting toward the place where the body had been. The crime had not left. It had settled, seeping into the soil, into the walls, into the marrow of everyone who lived here. Detectives arrived in pairs, grey suits and tired eyes, notebooks flicking open like wings. They moved door to door, their questions polite but sharp, every answer weighed, every hesitation marked. The neighborhood, once a web of small talk and lawn care advice, was now an open book under cold light, and everyone inside it as a suspect. Stephanie's kitchen became an interrogation room. She sat with her hands clenched around a mug that had gone cold hours ago, her husband at the far end of the table, posture too straight, voice too smooth. The detective's pen scratched steadily, recording more than just words. The way Stephanie's eyes slid toward her husband when she spoke, the way he didn't meet her gaze, the pause before he admitted he barely knew the man who had died. Stephanie bit the inside of her cheek to keep from blurting out the truth she was choking on. She had seen them, him and Rachel, in the dark, too close, too familiar. But she stayed silent. For now, across the street, Eleanor's house carried its own tension. She handed the detectives tea, her smile brittle porcelain. Richard answered most of the questions, his voice confident, practiced. Eleanor sat beside him, her robe exchanged for a pressed blouse, but her hands betrayed her, twisting the edge of her napkin until it tore. The keycard burned like a coal in her pocket. She should tell them. She should place it on the table between the cups and say, "This was his." But the words locked in her throat. Because admitting she had it meant admitting she had gone out there first, had touched the body before anyone else. And the detective's eyes were already too sharp. Rachel welcomed them in with calm composure, Scout lying obediently at her feet. Her house smelled faintly of citrus and something floral, too clean, too precise. "I didn't know him," she said evenly. "I saw the commotion, but I stayed inside until it was over." Her smile was steady, her tone unshaken. Yet one detective lingered on her face longer than necessary, noting the slight tightening at the corner of her mouth when they mentioned the man's car, the slate-colored sedan. "You never spoke to him?" the detective pressed. Rachel tilted her head, serene. "I talked to many people," she said, "but not him." The detective scribbled something without looking up. Maya, meanwhile, had been pulled into the living room, with her mother hovering close, protective. But children see differently. Children notice what adults dismiss. When asked what she remembered, Maya's voice was small but clear. "I saw him. Before. In the car at the corner." Her mother's hand tightened on her shoulder, but Maya kept going. "He was talking to someone. She was—" A glance toward Rachel's house through the window. She was there. The room stilled. The detective's pen froze for a fraction of a second before continuing, slower this time. By evening, the street had fractured into camps. Some whispered that Rachel had brought trouble with her, that strangers always carried their pasts like seeds, planting them in places that didn't ask for them. Others muttered about Richard, about his wandering eyes, about Eleanor's sharp silences. And beneath it all was the unspoken suspicion that Stephanie's husband knew far more than he admitted. Trust once stretched thin, now snapped entirely. The investigation tightened like a noose. Phone records were requested, surveillance cameras reviewed, alibis tested. Each knock on a door felt like judgment. Each question a blade pressing closer to the bone. Secrets that had seemed manageable in the shadows now threatened to spill in the daylight, twisting even the innocent into liars. That night, the neighborhood glowed, not with warm lamplight, but with the cold reflection of patrol cars and the harsh glare of floodlights set up near the garages. Shadows stretched long and distorted across the lawns, and every step creaked with the weight of suspicion. Neighbors retreated behind locked doors, whispering to each other that maybe, just maybe, they had been living among a killer all along. And in the quiet of her room, Maya pressed the torn corner of the photograph to her notebook, her pencil scrawling the only truth she was certain of. Everyone was lying, but not everyone knew how well they were being watched. The investigation had stripped the neighborhood bare. By now, every whispered alibi had been tested, every polite smile dissected, every lingering glance logged like evidence. And still, nothing settled. If anything, the truths that emerged only twisted tighter, cutting through the fragile fabric that once passed for peace. Stephanie was the first to break under the weight. She could no longer contain the ache of pretending. One night, she stood in her kitchen with the receipt pressed flat on the counter, the ink smudged from her trembling fingers. Her husband walked in, stopped, and the silence between them grew sharp. "You've been lying to me," she whispered, her voice brittle. He reached for the receipt, but she slammed her palm over it. "Don't. Just don't." She wanted to scream Rachel's name, to drag the truth into the open, but the word lodged like glass in her throat. Instead, she turned away, tears stinging, while behind her, he sank into a chair and buried his face in his hands. For the first time, he looked guilty. Not caught, guilty. Meanwhile, Eleanor could not escape the key card burning in her drawer. She had hidden it beneath scarves, but each time she passed the dresser, she could feel its presence, demanding to be acknowledged. Late at night, when Richard was asleep, she would take it out, run her thumb over the embossed letters, Asta, and imagine the hotel room it belonged to. Who had met there? Who had betrayed her there? In the silence, she admitted to herself what she had never dared. She feared it was Richard, and if it was, then Rachel was more than a stranger. She was the knife that had slit open Eleanor's life for the second time. Maya, though still a child, carried truths heavier than any adult guessed. She had seen too much. Her father's late-night whispers, her mother's stifled sobs, Rachel in the car with the man who now lay on the ground. She filled page after page of her notebook, not with answers, but with fragments. The crescent scar, the photo corner, the messages that came at night. She knew what the adults did not. That the lies were not separate threads, but one web. And the more they struggled, the more they bound themselves together. And Rachel, always Rachel, moved through it all with the poise of someone who had rehearsed every step. Yet even her mask began to slip. At the grocery store, she bumped into a detective she thought she had avoided. He smiled politely, asked one too many questions about her past. And for just an instant, Her voice wavered. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with Scout at her feet, staring at the Polaroid pinned on the corkboard. The photo's edges curled tighter, as though the picture itself wanted to fold in on the truth it carried. She traced the blurred figures with her fingertip and whispered, "You should have stayed gone." The neighborhood was no longer merely suspicious. It was boiling. Neighbors accused neighbors in muttered tones at the cafe, suspicion leaping from house to house like fire across dry grass. Who had placed the envelope under Rachel's door? Who had sent the midnight message? Who had been in the man's car the night before he died? The detectives listened, scribbling, but offered no reassurance. Every secret spilled birthed another. One evening, as the sky bled purplely and the first porch lights flicked on, a scream shattered the fragile calm. Stephanie had finally spoken Rachel's name. From her porch, she hurled it into the street, the syllables sharp, venomous. Her husband stood behind her, silent, while Rachel appeared at her doorway, Scout bristling at her side. Their eyes locked across the distance. Two women who knew too much, their silence as dangerous as their words. Neighbors leaned out from windows, the street holding its breath. For a moment, it seemed as if the truth might finally rip free, but Rachel only smiled. A small, controlled, devastating smile. "Be careful," she said softly, her voice carrying like a whisper across water. "Not everyone can survive what they're hiding." Then she closed her door. The street exhaled. Stephanie collapsed into tears. And Eleanor, watching from her window, clenched the keycard in her hand so tightly that its edge cut into her skin. The blood welled, bright and undeniable, just as the truth would soon be, because secrets never stayed buried here. They spilled, staining everything they touched, until even the innocent looked guilty. By noon, the neighborhood had the gray, thinned light of a place waiting for a verdict. The tape still drew its yellow breath around the garages. Patrol cars idled and then didn't. People spoke in doorways, as if the air could overhear and testify. Eleanor dressed like she was going to church. Pressed blouse, pearls that had belonged to her mother, and walked herself to the station because she was tired of holding her breath. The detective met her with a paper cup coffee and eyes that did not pretend to be kind. They took her into a room that was mostly table and chair and the buzzing of a bad light. "I should have told you yesterday," she began, fingers finding the nape of her sleeve, smoothing it, because that was what her hands knew how to do. She reached into her purse and placed the rectangle of plastic on the table like a confession made physical. The embossed star caught the dull light. "Asta. I found it last night, near his hand," she said. "I picked it up because—" The sentence stalled and fell. "Because in the dark, we all behave like the people we're afraid we might be." The detective didn't touch the card. "Anything else?" he asked, tone neutral, as if neutrality could stop a heart from pounding. Eleanor swallowed. "I left something." Her voice went small, and she hated it for that. "A note. Under the new neighbor's door. I wrote, 'I know who you are.' It was ugly and wrong, and I don't—" Tears rose, hot, humiliating. She blinked them down. "I didn't know who she is. I only knew I was afraid of losing what I have. of repeating old mistakes. Akaifa, she said the last without looking up. The detective's pen scratched, even and patient, as if it could write her into clarity. Why were you afraid of her? He asked. Because my husband looks at danger and thinks it's invitation, she said, the words bitter on her tongue. Because I have been here before. Because the newness of a woman is a mirror some men would rather look into than their own marriage. The detective nodded without judgment. The midnight call? He asked. Eleanor flinched. A man, she said. He said, you don't know what's in your house. She let out a breath that tasted like metal. I thought he meant Rachel. Maybe he meant Richard. Saying it out loud felt like stepping off a curb you misjudged. The simple drop was enough to jar the teeth. They took the card. They logged her note. They did not thank her. When she left the room, she felt smaller than when she had entered, as if confession had cost her inches. Back home, the afternoon had turned the color of a bruise. Richard waited at the kitchen island with a whiskey he pretended was tea. What did you tell them? He asked, voice careful. The truth, she said. His mouth tightened. About the card? She nodded. Silence held like wet wool between them. And, she added, because the day had already ruined her pride. I told them about the note. He stared at her as if she had set fire to their bed. Eleanor, he said, her name a reproach. Do you know what you've done? She laughed once, small and sharp. I stopped pretending. She set her purse down and did not sit. He turned the glass between his fingers. The ice knocked against the sides like a trapped thing. I need to tell you something, he said finally, and his voice had the dull courage of someone who has run out of places to put his shame. I hired him. The room tilted by a degree. The man who died, he went on, eyes fixed on the glass, a private investigator, Derek Hale, a name that made the dead man almost a person. I wanted to know about her. He didn't say Rachel's name. He didn't have to. It was curiosity at first, that's all. He lied, and the lie was flimsy, a paper hat in rain. But he found things, not much at the start. Then more, and he called you, he added, to warn you about me. That's what he does. He digs and then he destabilizes. He said the same to me. You don't know what's in your house. It's how he keeps people paying. Eleanor's first reaction was not anger. It was relief, slicked with nausea. The voice in the night had been about the man she had promised herself she would never lose sleep over again. How long? She asked. Richard's jaw worked. A few weeks, he said. We met at the Astor Suites, off the highway. Neutral ground? The word neutral sounded obscene. He brought printouts, stills from cameras, places she'd been before she got here. Nothing illegal, just a pattern. He finally looked up. In his eyes, she saw a boy who had never learned to turn away from lit windows. And then he started asking for more. Money to keep quiet, money to keep digging. I told him to stop. His laugh was humorless. He didn't. Eleanor pressed her palms flat to the cool island. Did you tell the police? He hesitated. Not yet. You will, she said. Not a request. A sentence handed down. Across the street, Stephanie's husband sat at his own kitchen table, with the phone face down in front of him like a small coffin. When Stephanie came in, he pushed the device toward her as if surrendering a weapon. "He texted me too," he said. "The number was unknown, the message plain, it's already begun." Then later, at 3:11 a.m., another, "You'll pay to keep it small." He closed his eyes, shame rippling his face. "I met him once," he said. "At the same place. The Astor. He knew about us." The word us fell between them like a plate and smashed. "There is no us," Stephanie said, voice breaking. "There is you, and there is what you did." He nodded, tears he hadn't earned burning his eyes. "I didn't hurt him," he said. "I swear to you, I didn't." She could not yet decide if that mattered. By late afternoon, a detective returned the neighborhood's knocks with one of his own. He stood on Eleanor's porch. "Mrs. Hart," he said, "we pulled footage from the Astor. Your husband met the deceased there 3 times in the last 10 days. He didn't say, 'What do you think that means?' He didn't have to. We also have footage from the night of," he added, "but the angle is bad. Someone else was there. A woman. Hood up. We can't get a face." The words plugged into Eleanor like a shock. A hood. A woman. Any woman. Every woman. The detective's gaze slid past her shoulder. "May we speak with your husband again?" She nodded because nodding was the only motion that didn't feel like breaking. Evening unrolled. Lights came on, one by one, in squares that pretended to be safe. Maya sat cross-legged on her bed and copied everything she'd learned in a neat hand because neatness gave chaos a grid to cling to. Derek Hale, P.I., Astor, Hood, Richard, Dad. She drew the hotel keycard from memory and shaded in the star, pressing until the paper thinned. On the corkboard across Rachel's kitchen, the Polaroid curled another millimeter, as if trying to retreat into itself. The knock on Eleanor's door at 9 o'clock was soft enough to be mistaken for rain. She opened it to find Rachel on the porch, hair pulled back, face bare of everything but intent. Scout sat like a shadow at her heel. For a second, neither of them spoke, and the quiet between them was of a different species than the street's hush. This one had heat. "May I?" Rachel asked. It was not quite a question. Eleanor stepped aside. In the living room, in the lamplight that made everything look like a memory, Rachel didn't sit. She stood by the mantel, fingers touching nothing, gaze traveling the framed photos that documented a marriage the way museums document spoons. "I owe you the truth," she said at last. The sentence was simple. The cost of it was not. Not because you asked for it, but because I can feel your fear. Like weather. Eleanor's mouth was dry. "All right, my name hasn't always been Rachel," she said. And Eleanor's heart stuttered the way a house does when the heat kicks on after a long winter. Years ago, I was Lara. The ghost-smudged name on the collar, Lock Lara, clicked into place in Eleanor's mind with quiet, sick satisfaction. "I left because staying was going to kill me or the person I loved," Rachel went on. "Not a husband, not a lover. My sister." Her eyes flicked to the mantel. No, to a space above it. To a point somewhere else entirely. We were supposed to start over together. We almost did. Then someone found us. So I moved again. And again. You learn how. You change names, you change entrances and exits. You change the way you walk at night." "Who found you?" Eleanor asked, voice barely more than breath. "Men who make a business of following women who are trying to become someone new," Rachel said. "Sometimes they call themselves investigators. Sometimes they don't bother to call themselves anything." A muscle fluttered in her cheek. "Derek Hale found me 2 towns ago. He found me again here. He wanted money to forget what he knew. He wanted—" She lifted a shoulder, let it drop. Leverage. Eleanor felt the room tilt and steady. "Did you meet him at the Astor?" "Once," Rachel said. "In a lobby full of people. I told him I had nothing left to give him. He laughed. He knew different." She looked down at her hands. "When he texted you, when he called you, he was not trying to save you. He was using you. He thought you would shake your house until something fell out he could sell back." Eleanor saw it then with the clarity of a slap. The way fear could be harvested like a crop. The way guilt could be turned into currency. "And last night?" Eleanor asked. She hadn't meant to. The question came on its own steam. Rachel closed her eyes. "I didn't kill him," she said. She opened them. "But I saw him. In the car on the corner. He was waiting." Her mouth twisted. "For me? Or for someone who looks like me?" She took a breath that seemed to scrape on the way in. "I went back inside. I locked the door. I made tea. Scout ran. When I found him, Maya had already found—" She swallowed the word body. "I called it in after you did." Silence hovered, then perched. For the first time, Rachel looked small enough to fit in the room. She glanced toward the door as if remembering she could leave. "I'm sorry for the note," Eleanor said suddenly, the apology clumsy and raw. "It was mine. I wrote it." Rachel's eyes warmed and cooled in a heartbeat. "I know," she said, not unkindly. "I've had worse." She exhaled. "I'm not here to take anything from you." The words were a gift and a wound. "But someone is," she added, and the sentence lay on the rug between them like a snake. Eleanor thought of her husband's glass turning, of Stephanie's husband's phone, face down like a surrendered secret, of the hooded woman in a hotel hallway camera frame. "Who?" she asked. Rachel shook her head once. "I don't know." Then softer. "Not yet." At the door, she paused, hand on the knob. "He texted me too," she said, almost as an afterthought. "Before he died, a single line." Eleanor waited. "It's done." Rachel's mouth hardened. "He liked to start fires and then send smoke signals." After she left, the house felt overfull with all the things that had finally been said. Eleanor stood in the doorway until the hall light timed itself off. Upstairs, she heard Richard moving, footsteps in a pattern she knew from other nights that ended in apologies, or didn't end at all. She took the Astor card stub the police had left her with, a photocopy for her statement, and pressed the star into her palm until it left a crescent. Across the street, Maya watched the 2 women separate and wrote in her notebook. "Lara, Rachel, PI, blackmail, hood." She underlined the question mark until it tore through the page. Her phone hummed once, a new message from the same no-name number that had told her to stay inside. She hesitated, then opened it. "Tell the truth, and someone will lie louder." She stared until the words doubled. Then she turned her phone over, face down, and lay back in the dark. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a door closed as gently as a lie. Somewhere else, a car engine turned over and then didn't. The night reset itself. Confession, it turned out, did not cleanse. It clarified. And clarity can be more dangerous than any secret. The neighborhood was never the same after that night. Even before the police had closed off the crime scene, before the whispers became theories and the theories hardened into accusations, something fundamental had shifted. The illusion of safety, the one that had wrapped the street like a soft quilt, was gone, torn apart by the truth that no one wanted to see until it stood in the open. Undeniable. Stephanie woke each morning to the sound of silence. Her husband's presence beside her, feeling more like absence. She had spent years convincing herself their marriage was intact, patching over betrayals with patience, smoothing jagged edges with lies. But now, the walls of their home were thin with echoes. Her own voice screaming Rachel's name, his two smooth excuses, the silence that had followed. The receipt was no longer hidden. She left it on the counter, but it lay like a scar, impossible to ignore. When she finally said, "It's over," her voice did not tremble. And though her husband tried to speak, tried to hold the pieces together, she walked away. The truth had cut deeper than betrayal itself. She had been living beside a stranger, and that stranger had been living beside someone he did not see. Across the street, Eleanor carried her confession like a stone in her chest. She had admitted the note, admitted the fear, admitted that Richard's gaze was enough to undo her. And Richard, cornered by the truth, could no longer dodge. He told her everything. The meetings, the blackmail, the way Derek Hale had turned lives into currency. She listened, her face still, her hands steady. And when he finished, she said nothing. Because nothing was left to say. For years she had fought to hold him, to keep what was hers, to forgive what should not be forgiven. But now she knew. Some men do not change. They circle back to temptation like moths to flame. And if she stayed, she would burn with him. Maya was the quiet witness to it all. Her notebook filled with sketches and names, fragments and arrows that pointed toward truths the adults had buried in their fear. She was too young to be the keeper of such knowledge, but she held it anyway, because someone had to. She had seen Rachel in the car, heard her words, felt the weight of her presence, and though Maya never spoke it aloud, she knew more than the detectives ever would. That Rachel's truth was complicated, layered like scars, not the neat narrative the neighbors craved. And yet, in her young heart, she also knew something else. That survival sometimes means leaving behind the people who cannot understand you. And Rachel, always Rachel, was gone by the time the investigation began to settle. Her house, once lit with warm lamps and scented with citrus, stood empty. The dog, Scout, vanished with her. No forwarding address, no goodbye, just the echo of her presence lingering in the neighborhood, like perfume after the wearer has long since left. Some said she had run because she was guilty. Others whispered she had left because she was afraid. And a few, though never aloud, wondered if she had simply seen too much, carried too much and chosen to vanish before the truth consumed her. The detectives found fragments, but never answers. Derek Hale's death remained an open file, full of notes, interviews, and photographs that proved everything, yet explained nothing. The Astor Suite's keycard sat in an evidence bag, its embossed star fading into irrelevance. The case was never solved, not in a way the neighbors could accept. Instead, it lingered, unsolved but unforgettable, a scar across their quiet street. In the months that followed, life continued, but never in the same way. The neighbors still mowed their lawns, still waved from driveways, still gathered at barbecues, where the food was warm but the laughter thin. Yet beneath it all, the wound remained. Trust had fractured. Eyes lingered longer. Doors were locked earlier. Children grew quieter, learning too soon that adults are not guardians of safety, but keepers of secrets. And so the neighborhood lived on, its peace only surface deep, its foundations cracked by betrayal and fear. In the end, no one truly knew what had happened that night. Whether the stranger's death was chance or consequence, whether Rachel was victim or villain, whether the sins belonged to the living or the dead. But what everyone knew, what no one could ever forget, was this: she didn't see it coming. None of them did. 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 None of them